Welcome back. So, where is the federal government headed with all of these regulatory efforts, from CMMC to President Biden's executive order on cybersecurity? Should we expect mandatory minimums across the whole of government in the near future? Our next distinguished guest is uniquely positioned to share his views on regulatory compliance trends across the federal government. He was the former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of Acquisition Management for the GSA, where he oversaw roughly 300 procurement personnel and contracts worth more than $30 billion per year. We are honored to have Keith Nakasone, who left the federal government in June after 32 years of service, to join VMware as a federal strategist. Welcome, Keith.
Well, welcome back to the CMMC Con, and I am so excited to be talking to you, Keith. I want to thank you for joining us at CMMC Con. To be honest with you, secretly, you're my favorite attendee this year, and I'm really excited to have you here. It's really wonderful, the amount of people that we've had participate in this. So without further ado, I just thought we would get into a whole conversation about how you're seeing the cybersecurity supply chain issue, especially from the perch from which you just left at the GSA. So, maybe I just kind of get a little bit of open up around some of your opinions on how the current landscape is going, especially around regulations. Maybe your thoughts now that you reflect back on your tenure at GSA and what you've seen on cybersecurity requirements. Do you think it's going in the right direction? Do you think that it's enough? Do you think it's too much? Just love to get your temperature check.
Sure. Thanks, Carl. One of the things that when I was over at within the federal government space is the a lot of the challenges that we saw, right? We saw an uptick in the cyber attacks, as you've seen with the SolarWinds and the ransomware. Things are getting more sophisticated, and one of the things that we need to focus on is the security framework, right? We need to focus on the security solutions. So with the recent release of the executive order and with the changes that we did, even with Section 889 of the Federal Acquisition Regulations to address the prohibition of telecom equipment and certain video surveillance cameras, it's all moving in the right direction, right? Because we need to concentrate on the oversight, and we need to understand working in this private-public engagement and looking at things from the whole of government, because we definitely need to start standardizing things across private and public and adopt commercial best practices as well.
I see a tremendous change. I kind of feel like when we look back on it, this is going to be a watershed period of time for the way that the government takes acquisition and cybersecurity really seriously. And the EO that you mentioned, and I'd love to unpack that a little bit, the executive order. It seems like it's this dark cloud sitting out there that people are trying to figure out what is going to come of it, right? Of course, President Biden said, I would like to get the agencies to tell me what they're going to be doing for among many things. One of them was supply chain. What would you say? I know today you don't have any direct knowledge and so forth, but if you're looking at crystal ball, do you think CMMC plays a factor in that going forward? Do you think it's something like CMMC-like, or is it something entirely new? How would you think about it going forward?
So when we look at new things, when things are first launched, it's really a journey. Right? This is not a one and done. This is going to be an iterative approach in moving towards looking at the workforce, looking at the processes, and also the technology. So when we look at the baseline of the executive order, what it really does is it tries to wrap their hands around looking at the entire whole of government approach, looking at the acquisition regulations, looking at the security framework, looking at the standards controls for the security requirements. And so the beauty about this is it gives a second look at the processes. It gives a second look at the gaps, identifying gaps and where we could bring things together from a private-public engagement. And I think, no matter where you sit in the ecosystem of security, security doesn't just fall on the CIO or the CISO, right? The security requirements falls on everyone, whether you're sitting in a public or private. It takes everyone to ensure that we protect our data, protect our IT infrastructure, and protect the intellectual property that we have in and around all of our even in the private industry, right? We have to protect all of that intellectual property that we have in the different various systems.
It's funny. I can remember stories about World War II, how people were asked to participate at a very, very personal level, either, get pots and pans to be melted for the war effort, or to actually help Rosie the Riveter and so forth to help in the production effort. And the whole country kind of rallied around the threat and the war that was out there. And of course, there's different variances of people out there that believe whether or not we're in the middle of some sort of new Cold War and so forth. But it seems to me like this is our day to be able to stand up and make a difference, right? To be able to participate in this. So I applaud what you've done at the GSA. I'm really looking forward to see how that moves forward. And you're right that this is a journey. You had NIST to start out with, and that continues on. CMMC, it's like Russian nesting dolls, right? CMMC kind of overlays on top of NIST, and NIST provides for the core. And who knows what will come, but I think, like you said, I can't imagine it being that much different than what is already here, right? That's where my head is. What do you think is the CMMC's future? There's been lots of, naysayers. There's been lots of promoters, of course. I think it provides for some trepidation in the marketplace for doing something. It allows definitely for excuses for people to wait and see. How would you guide small businesses on either NIST, CMMC, or the future if they're taking this wait and see attitude?
So one of the things with security is, when we look at the framework and when we're looking at everything as we build out, this from a national security perspective and even from a private industry perspective, we have to consider things from the whole approach, right? So as we look at, call it CMMC or something else, the real process in this is when we build things, we're looking at development, security, and operations, right? That whole DevSecOps process. And when we look at that, it never stays the same. And I'll give you this perfect example of the cloud ecosystem. When we look at multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, and we look at the complexities that are involved, nothing ever stays the same. So we cannot afford for security. The security framework will evolve. The risk management framework will evolve over time. Yeah. Therefore, our acquisitions will have to evolve and align with the technology and with the sophistication of what's happening in the cyber world. So as we look at everything as a whole, we have to understand, we cannot, I say, let our guard down. We always have to be, what can we do to be more proactive in this approach? How can we structure things to be more agile and flexible moving forward with our acquisitions to keep up with the technology, as well as the what I call the bad actors, right? And how do we continue to stay and lean forward? And that's one of the things about CMMC. It provides a framework. It provides another verify, validate, and comply, but it also has a check and balance, right? And so we continuously look at the risks. We continuously look at the processes that we have built to see what we need to change. And so as we move forward, these are some of the key things that we need to do from an organizational change perspective, as well as in looking at how we look at and view the IT infrastructure as a whole.
It's funny. I've heard it described. I completely agree with you. And I've heard it described by some saying, there was a day where things like access for handicapped people were not considered when building buildings, or we didn't have fire detection or suppression equipment in all buildings. And over time, we realized the dangers associated with those things. And we began to understand it's not something that you can just put here and there. It needs to be everywhere, right? And what I think we're struggling with today is there's still a lot of people that believe that these things are necessary, but not at any cost, or there's this cost discussion that pervades the whole dialogue. And I would love to get your opinion on how to think about costs, especially when it comes to the small business player. I know that you get this question all the time. I know that I get this question all the time. And I think it's for some reason, I don't think the smaller companies understand their role that they play in the threat and vulnerability situation for the government. And maybe I just give you a platform to respond to that.
Right. So, that's a good question, because when we look at the cost factor, when we first was from a procurement process, everybody would say, well, we can buy software as a commodity, lowest price technically acceptable.
Right.
We don't really have to look at things. But when you look at the security framework and you look at the way IT systems have evolved, especially in the cloud environment, the on-premise solutions or private cloud versus public cloud, we have to be concerned about what is that cost impact and how do we wrap our hands around it, right? So when, from a small business perspective, do they look at things from a different lens? Maybe from an outsourced perspective, can they adopt a cloud service provider that has all of the standards, controls, and everything pre-vetted? So all they're doing is paying a monthly cost to house the controlled unclassified information, right? And is there service level agreements that could be leveraged in that process? So when we talk about the business, it's just like parts of private industry, parts of government, they've outsourced parts of the capabilities, right? So that they can enhance or improve their portfolio or as well as their posture.
It's a great point. It's a great point. I mean, what I'm hearing you say is that via these requirements, there's two things that's going on. Yes, still the government is going to procure on the lowest cost bidder, but you want to make sure that the quality of the product is all the same as it relates to security, because low cost could mean low security, right? So that's the first point that I think. So I think that's a very valuable point that not many people, it's lost on many people. I think the second point that was really powerful is that I'm hearing through the technical acquisition process, you're forcing innovation on behalf of the providers to not always look at it the same way that they've looked at it. They have to be innovative in their own approach, and maybe outsourcing some of it is a great idea.
When we look at things, it's that art of the possible, right?
Right.
Do what you do well, and if you don't do something well, think of other ways that you could actually build upon it, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that when we're looking at the controls, the processes, and where everybody or where businesses fit within, whether it's Department of Defense, the defense industrial base, or the civilian industrial base, we see a lot of crossover. So I think this is a great time for those processes to be looked at. But also, if there's systems that already exist, like the Department of Defense has the Supplier Performance Risk System, SPRS, where it houses a lot of that 800-171 information, adoption could just take place there, right? And so these are the kinds of things that we need to look at.
I have to tell you that SPRS system, the Supplier Performance Risk System, and I can tell how much it's being enforced because we at Cybersheath, we see customers near daily coming to us that the government has turned off from a payments perspective because they're not in the system or they won't award them a contract. It's been an amazing change in behavior, in action. There's no doubt about it. Regardless of what you think of it, the change is there. You know what I would love to do? I'd like to switch focus just a little bit, just to get from, in your words, because I think there is a lot of confusion out there. Today, in the GSA, what does the GSA require for cybersecurity? I understand that there's the STARS and the Polaris contract have some interest in CMMC or something like this. Can you help just give clarification on where is GSA today?
Sure. So when we were looking at the when I was there, I have to clarify. The thought process was from a government-wide acquisition contract perspective. It was really looking at that contract and how do we build a large acquisition vehicle with the thought process that you could add requirements or incorporate requirements as needed.
Right.
So the way the framework was built around the government-wide acquisition contract was to look at the whole entire process first. How do we incorporate the language so it would be within scope at the base of the contract, but not necessarily require every order to be CMMC level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. It was it would be awarded based on the requirements of the agency or an organization. So it has the flexibility of going from level 1 through level 5, and it would be able to be so the flexibility was there not only for Department of Defense but for the civilian agencies as well if they wanted to adopt it. And that's the one thing that we wanted to do is create a government-wide contract that would be able to be flexible, agile, and add requirements as needed. So it would be married up with whatever requirements that were needed, because we all know that the IT systems are not the same. We all know that there's different levels of risk tolerance for each of the systems. So we said, hey, let's line up or synchronize the acquisition vehicle in that same mindset, in that same thought process.
That makes sense. It makes perfect sense. How much spending goes through GSA today? What's that rough number?
The rough number for the IT category from a business volume perspective is around $30 billion.
$30 billion. Yeah. So it's a pretty, that's amazing. About how many contractors is it? I know that the DoD advertises about 350,000 contractors and so forth. About how many contractors you think go through the GSA organization? Have you any clue or any standards?
So from the IT category perspective, there's roughly, it's not as quite as the 300,000 number, but I don't know if that number is accurate. But what I will say is from a percentage perspective, when we look at the defense industrial base and when we look at the civilian industrial base, there is a lot of crossover, right? So when we see the vendors on the defense industrial base side, it pretty much you can almost guarantee they're going to be on the civilian side as well. So, if I was to put a thumb on there, you're looking at 90-some% about the same. How about
that? I switch into the provider networks. Like one of the things that I hear, and I'm not sure exactly how to respond to it. Not that it's my role per se, but you hear people saying they're struggling with finding good solution providers of the requisite needed services. So like you mentioned, that maybe they can outsource some of these services, or maybe they need a certification, and that things are going a little slower than planned, and so forth and so on. Can you comment on where you think things are today? Do you feel like there's adequate service providers and where things will be headed in the future? I'd love to get your take on that.
Sure. There's a lot of resources, consultant services support that is provided, and a lot of that information is actually available out on the
Right.
web. I know companies like Gartner, Forrester, et cetera, they put their, Gartner uses a quadrant chart, et cetera, and they actually say which are the top providers. And there's also information out there that kind of breaks things down. So if you look at the Federal Procurement Data System, the FPDS data from all the contract awards, I mean, you would be able to see, or USA Spend, you would be able to see all the top providers for federal government. And, that collaboration and communication with those companies are key to sharing this information. And there's a lot of nonprofit organizations where this information sharing goes on, such as ACT, IAC, ATARC, et cetera, where they come together and they share the commercial best practices. They share about the challenges from a private perspective, from a public perspective. And these are those active engagements that is required moving forward. So as we look at CMMC and as things may change along the timeline, this is where we can see and start to synchronize some of that commercial best practices and government processes and start to make some significant changes in the security posture.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I don't know if you had the chance to attend, but we have some of the PTAC and the MEP organizations here, and they have been taking a leadership role, I think, in some states in helping members, DIB members, Defense Industrial Base, especially members, navigate what does this all mean, and how do I get to the SPRS, and what is PI, and all of these things, right? And how it works. You know what I love, because I think you had to deal with a lot of this, is this notion of COTS, commercial off-the-shelf software. I get questions quite a bit about why, first of all, why is there a dual standard between COTS and not COTS? Very interesting question, by the way. And there is this discussion about of all the attacks that have been successful appear to have been in the supply chain, largely COTS or commercial off-the-shelf like providers, or definitely COTS providers. And what is the future for a commercial off-the-shelf provider? And just one other piece to this, one other corollary, what we're seeing is a very interesting dynamic in that we now see a lot of COTS companies that know their COTS, that have actually already successfully argued their COTS to the government and won. They labor under the constant defense that they're COTS and have succumbed to the process to just be CMMC certified because they don't want to deal with the conversation over and over and over again. So I'd just love for you to kind of comment on where do you think the future of COTS supply chain cybersecurity is, and how do you think that's going to be affected by the executive order? And where do you think, just kind of in your crystal ball, I know it's just Keith Nakasone's opinion, but how do you think that's going to run?
So from as we look at commercial off the shelf, when we look at a company that builds a let's just say product A. But product A is plus B, plus C, plus D. So as you add things, and we're getting into the multi-cloud, hybrid cloud in solutions, right? We're looking at a number of commercial off-the-shelf products. We're looking at a number of processes that are, and a lot of the activities that are going on within the IT infrastructure. So as we look at commercial off-the-shelf, not as a singular, but as solutions, right? COTS solution as more than one. And that's basically what we're doing. The tools, the cyber tools, the security tools that we're using, we have to continuously move with it as well. right? So as we build out IT solutions, as we build out software and capabilities, et cetera, we have to be cognizant that there is this security layer piece that has to be not only at the network layer, but it has to be throughout the entire cloud stack. And so as the processes change as the business processes change, and as the technology solutions change, guess what? We have to change the policies, and we have to change the statute regulations and statutes that govern, because it doesn't stay. The ecosystem will change, and this is exactly what's happening.
It's very true. I mean, take a Tesla today. You would call that a commercial off-the-shelf product. I would imagine everybody would. But, at any moment, a Tesla can be updated just via the air by the company, and it becomes to look a little bit more like software over time or something along these lines. On that note, another element, and I'd love to get your take on it, is I noticed a lot of my brethren in the MSP, the IT managed services space, and the managed security services space, they're reticent to become certified or reticent to acknowledge that there's a requirement on them when they're managing a DIB customer with CUI. It seems to me like it's pretty obvious, but I'd just love for you to comment. Do you see that the supply chain rules go down into any managed service provider is handling CUI on behalf of their customers?
So when we look at that, it's almost the same thing when we look at financial institutions. Do we treat one different than the other, or do they have to all be in synchronization from the enterprise, right? So when we look at private and public, and we look at the whole of government and the whole of private industry, we look at things completely end to end, right? And so if we don't, then how do we create enterprise standards? How do we create enterprise controls? And this is the beauty about NIST, right? They're going through that process and looking for what is that baseline like, and how do we build into it, and how do we improve upon time? Nothing stays. We all constantly have revisions to the guidance that's coming out. And that's what I see with this journey, right? And so as things move, as security moves forward, as technology moves forward, as our business processes change because of the way the cloud is being developed, I think there's great opportunity for us to invest in aligning a lot of the workforce, the processes, and the technology, so that it's a continuous improvement process and not staying in this one and done, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So Keith, one of the things, I must tell you personally, I'm sad to see you go, because I think you've had such an amazing impact on the GSA and on the government in general. But I'd love to just give you an opportunity to opine. What was your biggest, your proudest moments, your biggest accomplishments you think happened at the GSA? And what's the one thing that you look back upon? I know it's not been that much time since you've departed that wonderful perch, but what is something that you'd like to see get accomplished, or you hope in the future will be accomplished by your successors?
That's a great question. So what from a thought leadership perspective, number one, innovations in emerging tech. We've structured when I was there, the government-wide contracts to be more innovative, more agile, more flexible, and I hope it continues to move in that direction. We were built out the cloud strategy, and hopefully that momentum continues to stay true. And enhancing the IT portfolio at large, as well as one of the proudest things that I am that we embedded in the whole entire process was the supply chain risk management program within the IT category. And so that was a huge lift, because it's a change not only the way we train our employees, but it's looking at the internal processes, looking at how we can embed supply chain risk as well as the compliance program within the ecosystem without being cost prohibitive, if you will, meaning that we can leverage resources that was already within the portfolio to help us move that needle within the security framework. And that's one of the things that I hope the energy will still be there. And again, one of the reasons why one of the big reasons was coming to VMware and staying in that cloud solutions and being able to be a thought leader within the private and public on cloud and continuously move towards that environment is one of the main focus of keeping government and private industry engaged with as technology changes, we'll be able to move forward.
Well, you're such a wonderful resource. It's really a coup that they have you, and it's great for our country, great for VMware. And it's wonderful to know that you're there actually on a different side working on the same problem. Before I tidy up, just this is like more of a personal question I have because I don't know the answer to this, and I'm hoping that you can help enlighten me. I'm familiar with in the DoD, they have these audits for these things, CMMC and these days, and NIST, the DIBCAC audits and so forth. We've become familiar with the DCMA. Is there an equivalent audit function that comes from GSA around these contracting vehicles? Like if people are compliant with the CMMC requirements in contracting vehicles, do they have that functionality? So from a review process, there is a administrative contracting part of the schedules program, as well as the government-wide acquisition contracts. And so it's really contract dependent. And so when we, for example, I'll give you the example of, the second generation IT that was created under the schedules program. That effort there had a supply chain risk management compliance piece to it. And I think one of the key things that we did was, as we move along that timeline, it really creates that process of looking at things from a different lens. It's not just the self-attestation process, but it's really taking it down to now we need to look, verify, and identify risks. And so as we go through that process, I know DHS and other civilian agencies are looking at this same format. What I'm hoping is that whole of government approach comes together and they look at, and we can build it together, private and public coming together and building that process and systems so that we don't have inconsistencies. Absolutely. I want to thank you very much, Keith, for your time, for your energy. I want to personally thank you for everything that you did with the U.S. government. It was an investment I know that you made on behalf of our whole country. So I want to thank you for your service to the country. And thank you for this time today. It's been wonderful. And I hope everybody out there in CMMC Conland was enriched by the information. You can see how small businesses are going to be affected beyond DoD. And I think that this stuff is clearly on the path towards being more and more organized by the government. Have a great day. Absolutely. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye now. Bye.
Carl and Keith, thank you both for an insightful and fascinating session on where all these regulatory initiatives might land. It's clear that if you're a contractor to the federal government, prime or sub, depending on the agency you support, your revenue is or will shortly be directly tied to cybersecurity mandatory minimums. It's trivia time. Let's take a moment to thank Microsoft, who sponsored today's trivia, and have some fun. We'll have 2 trivia games with 7 questions each, 1 game in the first half of the day and 1 game in the second half of the day. A winner from each trivia game will get a Bose portable speaker. So don't miss out on your chance to win. First game starts right now. Good luck.